Hi, I'm Dawn Hill. Tonight I'm going to be talking about Kaizen, and specifically starting your first Kaizen event. So we'll be talking tips and tricks and how to successfully hold your first Kaizen, and I hope you enjoy the material. I am so done with taking exams. I had no idea I would be up for taking more exams after I left CU. I was so done with testing. But it's been good for me. It's been good for me. I've learned a lot and been able to apply all of that. But I was about 3 years out of school when I went to work for Jacobs Truck Manufacturing, which is a Danaher company, and Danaher was really the first major corporation to bring the Toyota production system into the U.S. I didn't know this at the time. I was an engineer. I didn't care about that stuff. I just needed a job, right? So I walk in and I start hearing all these terrible stories about these Japanese people coming in once a quarter and making us stay here all night and changing everything around, and it was truly awful. but I learned a lot. It was painful, but the interesting thing was when I left there. So we improved the processes and smoothed things out so well. Jacobs Truck, at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, had just invented the hand-tight chuck. You know, the ones that you don't need that little key for in the hole and all of that. So they held the patent. Nobody else could make them. And they really needed to ramp up production quickly, be able to bring people on, train them quickly on easy processes, manage their inventory. You know, they were a small company that was just blowing up faster than they could manage. So they brought in this Shinjujitsu consulting group, which was made up of several of Taiichi Ohno. And for those of you who are not familiar with that name, he's considered to be the father of the Toyota production system. I guess back in the 50s, after he came over, Mr. Toyota came over, talked to Mr. Ford, and took some ideas away, but had to do things differently from the way that Ford was doing them. Ford had tons of inventory, right? And they managed their entire supply chain. They couldn't do that. They had very limited resources. Everything was bombed out, right, in Japan. And so they had to be a bit more clever about how they did things. So these gentlemen were retired from Toyota, had been part of putting that whole system together, and then they were hired to come over and help us put our systems together. And it was all very raw material. As far as what they were teaching us about the Toyota production system. They were teaching engineers, so we weren't the supply chain guys. They were just trying to teach us how to get the throughput. And so for those of you who were here for Jeff's presentation about theory of constraints, we talked about throughput and balancing and recognizing your bottlenecks and how to balance your business, reduce inventory, manage your costs. And so that's what they were all about. The concept of Kaizen kind of grew out of all of that tool usage and the creation of all these tools and how to go about implementing all of that. And so the concept of Kaizen, a Japanese word that all of you have probably heard before. But where does it come from? And why do we call it that? And so let's break this apart. So Kaizen is actually two words in Japan. The first one meaning change. And the second one we're probably more familiar with. We talk about Zen, right? Everything relaxed, everything's good, everything's calm, steady, predictable. We like that. So change for the good. Simple as that. Well, okay, Where do we start? Well, before we get into all of the depth, we're going to look at some tools and some processes and get really deep. I don't want to lose you all. I know we've all had long days already. And I want to take a little detour for just a second, and you'll see why I've done this. But in the spirit of Zen, let's take a little side trip. How about a vacation? Anybody recognize either of these places?
Tahiti.
Tahiti. Been there?
Yep.
Have you? How about this one?
Hawaii? No, that's looks like southern Spain.
Close. You're close.
Or southern France.
Yes. It's Nice. Nice,
Cool.
France.
Cool.
Have you been there? Or somewhere in the southern Europe? That's right, you're only 2 years out of school. So, Chuck's been to Tahiti. Did you stay at this place?
Pretty close.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. Anybody else been any neat, exotic places like this? It looks wonderful. So, Chuck, you just hopped a plane and you went there, right?
On my honeymoon.
You just, let's go. Honey, let's go.
8 months in advance.
Wow.
Proper prior planning prevents poor performance.
Oh, yeah.
And what we decided to do is call Club Med.
Ah. So you called a consultant.
We did. Also a travel agent.
Yeah.
And said, plan it out.
Super. Yeah, so this looks like a great place to be. A good, calm place to be. But before we just hop a plane and go there, there's work to be done, right? So there's questions to be answered, planning to do. I don't know anything about either of these places. Like I would be calling Club Med, I would be calling my friends who've been there before, be calling the travel agent. Answering a few questions. So the first question, what information do I even need? A map? How would I get around? Do they have Uber? Do I rent a car? Do they drive on the left-hand side of the road or the right-hand side of the road? I don't even know. Do they speak English? Do I need to learn another language? Bring my translator app? Do I bring a bathing suit? Do I have need a jacket in the evening? Do I need formal wear? Do I need shorts and pants? And what kind of shoes, right? I mean, that's really important to us girls. What shoes must I bring? And then, what do I want to do when I get there? We're not asking you what you did. Some of us may want to go out and be adventurous. So maybe we scuba dive. Maybe we search out waterfalls. We go to the local zoo, whatever. But we'd need to know, we need to have a plan, right? And then where do we go to get that information? So do I know somebody who's been there? Do I call the travel agent, the expert, right? Or nowadays I can get on the internet. You guys have been married for a while, pre-internet. But you could buy a travel book probably. AAA has their travel books, their triptychs and all of those kind of things. And then, who am I taking with me? The honeymoon, that's an easy answer. Those of us with other family members, do I take mom and dad? Do I take the kids? Who am I taking? My brother and his family? Who's on the team? And who's going to help do all this planning? They're going to want a piece in it, right? They're going to maybe want to do something different than I want to do. And so we're going to have to work that out. Well, guess what? Your Kaizen event, your change for the good, is going to be the same way. The key to a successful Kaizen is going to be in answering all these kinds of questions. Speaking the language. There is a language to Kaizen and the Toyota production system and Lean and Six Sigma and all of these things. And you don't want to bring somebody onto your team and they don't know the language. So you may have to do some pre-training, or you at least need to recognize that you're going to need to explain some things to them so that you don't lose them and lose the effectiveness of what they have to contribute to whatever it is you're trying to do. What materials am I going to need? What resources? The roadmap. All kinds of information that you're going to want to have before you jump in and try to really do anything. So the benefits of thorough planning, and we all know this, you know, fail to plan and plan to fail, right? Everybody's heard that. So we want to make sure we get a good return for our money and time and resources. We want it to be a fun and rewarding experience, and this is very important, especially for your first one. If you don't make it fun, if you don't make it rewarding, nobody's going to want to do it again. And the key to Kaizen is that continuous improvement. We're taking little steps. We want to take one step, we want to get a good win, and then prep for the next step. So the consequences is that we have a poor experience, nobody wants to do another one, and the whole initiative has failed. We've done a whole ton of planning, and we've tried to kick this off, and we failed. It's more than just a failed Kaizen event. When your company has committed to doing Kaizen, they've committed to trying to make a culture change. This will not work without support from the top and without that drive to change the culture, to bring everybody along. So you don't want to turn anybody off, especially with poor planning. So know what you're diving into. And Mr. Deming, it's not enough to do your best. You got to know what to do and then do your best. So really good advice. And throughout the presentation, I've kind of dropped some Ono-isms, as we call them. Mr. Ono, again, the father of Lean, the father of the Toyota production system, there's all kinds of quips and quotes out there on the internet, things that he said that are very poignant, right to the point, good things, good takeaways. Some of them are funny. I mean, he teaches kind of in a biblical sense. He uses stories that are maybe not related to manufacturing to try and help people understand. So there's some interesting quips there. So here's going to be our map. And so let me back up one step. Chuck read all the acronyms, and it was an alphabet soup of them. But in the past, a couple decades ago, Lean was a school and Six Sigma was a school, two separate schools of knowledge. One talked about smoothing out the process, eliminating waste, being effective, being efficient. And Six Sigma talked about improving your quality, reducing your defects, closing up your amount of variation, removing special causes, those kinds of things. When I went and got my Master Black Belt, we combined them. So I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. We combined the two concepts and they marry together very well. So the way I do Lean is by a concept that comes out of Six Sigma, and that's called the DMAIC process. This is our roadmap, and this is the order in which we want to do things in order to be most effective. And you can plug Kaizen into any of these pieces of the process. I wouldn't recommend doing a Kaizen and trying to hit them all. That's too big. You want Kaizen to be small chunks. So what I've tried to do with this presentation is kind of draw the roadmap and plug in some of the different tools that I will definitely not have time to go into depth on, but find a good travel agent. And we've got Peter here tonight. He was supposed to be doing a yellow belt class in a couple of days. We've just got so many people out of town and different things going on. We've got, you know, small attendance. We're very cozy here this evening. So next time. But you know, if you don't have somebody within your organization that's familiar with these tools and can guide you and kind of Uber you around the roadmap, find somebody like myself, like Peter, somebody in your organization or in the area that can kind of come in and facilitate for you, help kind of guide you along the path and keep you out of the ditches and make it a very positive experience as you go through your changes. So in this order, we want to define the problem, very, very important. Then we want to take our measurements. So find out where we are. What's the current state? Excuse me. Then we want to analyze what we've measured. So all this data that we're going to collect, we want to measure. So all different tools for doing those things. Then, and only then, do we improve. This is the fun part. We always want to get here. And in a lot of cases, we jump right to this. Kaizen, improvement, change stuff. We got to change stuff. Don't get ahead of yourself. That's where we get in trouble, when we just start shooting from the hip and just try stuff. We want to speak from data. We want to know where we are before we start changing things. It can get very dangerous. I had somebody recently say something, and I thought, you know, that's a really good point. Things are the way they are now for a reason. It may not be a good reason, but they're like that for a reason. And so we don't want to jump in and upset the apple cart until we understand what is in that apple cart, what's supporting the apple cart, and then we can start carefully making changes for the good. Then once we find something that works, Zach?
Is Plan, Do, Check, Act equivalent to that? Do you see that as an equivalent process? Or
the way I've always dealt with Plan, Do, Check, Act is that winds up kind of in this middle piece. So you do the planning, you're measuring and analyzing, and then you do. And then you're checking the results of your do. And depending on what those results look like, you may loop back, or you may put a control in place and then loop back and start at the beginning. So Plan, Do, Check, Act kind of happens inside of this circle as well. It was a super question. Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of acronyms and tools and things, and they do tend to all fit together. And you want to make sure that you understand where to plug it in. So
when we teach it, kind of just juxtapose them on top of each other.
Yeah, and it works. And it's the check is.
I wanted to see if you saw them dichotomously or.
No, they work together. It's just that the Plan, Do, Check, Act is kind of happening inside this piece, and then depending on your check, you go this way or you go back this way.
In terms of lean, do you consider the control part there the standardization part of lean?
Yeah, and we're going to get into that towards the end. Obviously, that's going to be. Yeah. Okay. Super.
I'm not challenging you. I need to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
Because really, there's no information out there on this.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and please, if you have questions or you have something to add, please stop me.
Cameraman?
Yeah, the cameraman's got a question.
So when you're developing your team and everyone, these groups of people that know the language, how do you get that guy that halfway through the defining or measuring who wants to immediately say, well, I already know, based on what we're talking about now, I know exactly how to fix this problem.
Oh, yeah.
And we haven't even really analyzed any of the information.
Yep. And sometimes I'm that guy. You know, coming from an engineering background, we just want to fix stuff and be done. and I do. I get really excited. But those kind of people, you know, you got to harness their excitement and try to get as much data from them. And utilize their knowledge of the process to kind of bring everybody else along. And typically what I'll do is kind of have that person be an advocate. A lot of times I'm walking into a situation as a facilitator where I know nothing about what the team is trying to fix. I'm just there to help them use the tools, right? And you always have those folks that, I don't see why we have to waste our time going through this. I know exactly what to do to fix it. And I say, that's awesome, and we're going to get to that this afternoon, but I'm going to need your help especially to help us map out, and you tell us where we are and then where to plug in your solution, because we want to get that solution along with everyone else's and figure out how best to move that forward. Yeah, so
you get out of mind trick.
yeah. These are not the drones you're looking for, right? Yeah, so sometimes you got to reel those people in, and I totally relate to their excitement, and I enjoy having those people because they are excited and they want to try stuff. It's the people that say, this is the way we have always done it, and I don't see why we have to change. Those are more difficult. So, I always like having an advocate, somebody who's ready to jump in and do. And so, I pet them nicely. I'm like, I am so excited to jump in with you, but let's bring these other folks along, and then we'll be ready to go. All right. So define. We've talked a little bit about this already. So where are we starting from? That's very important. We've got to understand where we are now. And then as a team, we've got to decide where we want to go. And sometimes that mission comes from the boss, from upper management. We've got to reduce inventory by X%, right? How are we going to do that? So the first thing is to find out, well, how much inventory do we have? And where is it? And then what's the gap? So where do we need to go? And then we define the goal. So maybe we decide we're not going to bite off this whole piece at one time. Maybe for our little project, we're going to commit to a smaller piece of this gap. So what do we want to tackle? And then, I think I already mentioned this, whatever we choose, especially for the first one. So we're talking here about our first Kaizen event. We want to choose something that's going to give us an easy win. That is so important. Set yourselves up for success. And you may have, coming in as the team leader, you may already have the answer for how this could be done. And you don't want to just lead the team into that. Somebody may have some better ideas that they can add on top of that. And you not only get the easy win, but you go beyond the target. And that's really exciting for the team. So very important to define that, because you want there to be a finish line. You want there to be a goalpost. That's what makes it fun and exciting. You've got a target, and you want to get there. If all it is we're just going to make things better, okay, it's not as exciting. And then you don't know if you got there. Well, is this good enough? Is that, yeah, it's pretty good. Good job. Pat them on the head, and then you don't know where you are. So it's much more exciting if you set out a goal. And then even if you don't hit the goal, you can come back later and congratulate the team for getting 75% of the way there. And, and I had a bet with so-and-so that we wouldn't even get 50% of the way there. So, we still win. So the map. And Jeff took us through, a very simple map, 5 processes that all fed each other. And the real world is never that simple, right? Unfortunately. And there's all kinds of processes, and there's all kinds of different tools that we can use to measure different processes. So this little eye chart here is your typical value stream map, something that you would use to map a process. And you would map all the steps in the process, and then the cycle times and the changeover times and the manning and the inventory in between, and how the signals are coming from production control to control that process, and very complex. You can also use, if you've got a business type front office process. We call this a swim lane diagram. This is one of my favorites. We've recently, within the company that I work for, my day job, we've started kind of pushing Kaizen up into the offices, into the supply chain organization, into logistics, into accounting even. So some of the accounts receivable, accounts payable type processes, shipping, receiving. So things that you think are just happening with one or two silos involved, but then you get quality involved. So shipping, receiving winds up getting complicated because if you have quality checks and you have accounting getting involved. And so when you have all these silos, it's interesting to take the flow chart and figure out where all the handoffs are, because that's typically where things go wrong. I'm good as long as I'm in control of my process, but as soon as I have to hand it off to somebody else, everything goes crazy. Why? Am I not communicating something? Is there a piece of information they don't have? Is there some other group that they've got to get information from, and that group doesn't understand what it is they need or why? And so it's interesting to get all the parties in the room and start figuring out the current state. Why can't we get this process done efficiently? Some other types of maps, and these are more prevalent in the Six Sigma world. So the previous ones were Lean, this is more Six Sigma. So if we're looking at a specific process and trying to understand that the inputs and how they affect the output, and what if I change this and what happens. This one is kind of a manufacturing process oriented. This one is, we've got IT development process. So all the inputs into developing some IT interface, SAP, and those kinds of things. So how does this all work? How does it go together? What inputs do I need? What information do I need? What information comes out the other end? So these take quite a long time because the real world is complex. And you may have a Kaizen event, a day or two, to bring a team together and say, let's hash out a map and figure out who all needs to do what and in what order and with what information to get what we need out the other end. And how's it happening now, and how could we make it better? How could we make it less complex, flow a little better, less errors in the process, especially at the handoffs and those kind of things. And this is real important. This is one of the rules that I learned from the Japanese very early on. And I've always, I still have my original little sticky note that I wrote it down on back in the 90s. It says, go see, ask why, and show respect. So don't ever sit your team in a room and say, all right, let's just map this out. Go out there. Go out to the manufacturing floor, go out to the warehouse, go to the accounting department, talk to people, ask people what they're doing, why are you doing it that way? Like I said, the current state of things is the way it is for some reason. And somebody put something in place that worked at one time, now it's potentially broken, and we need to figure out how we can fix it. And then always show respect. So any information that you're gathering, we want to thank people, we want to give them credit for that. Ideas, we always want to be talking and getting people's ideas. Typically the people that are in the process and living with it every day, those frustrated people, they've already got some ideas for how to fix whatever the problem is. But nobody listened to them, and so they just stopped saying it. I hear that so often. I told them and I told them and I told them, and nobody was listening to me, so I just stopped saying it. Well, okay, I'm listening now. And they go, yeah, sure. But, write it down and take it into consideration. So another kind of map. So this one, you really have to go out and see. This is a spaghetti diagram. So this is following somebody around on the shop floor. So maybe your parts picker for your final assembly process. They've got to go and pick all the parts off the bill of material, and this is the path that they have to take for every single order. How do we fix that? So maybe some reorganization or something. So yeah, no one has more trouble than the person who claims to have no trouble. I like that one. If, like I said, the guy who says, this is the way we've always done it and I don't see why we have to change. There's no problem with this. There's always a way to improve things, so. All right, so once we figure out what the current state is, then we're gonna get into measuring. So we're not gonna analyze anything yet, we're just going to measure, figure out what's out there. And so we've got the 8 wastes. Historically, it's been 7 wastes, and in the last few years, they've added this 8th one, this non-utilized talent. I love that. So your person that is schooled in doing higher level things, that you have them doing clerical work, maybe to cover up absenteeism, maybe to cover up defects. This one is considered the mother of all wastes. That's the worst according to the Japanese, because that one, once you start overproducing, it hides all the other issues. So waiting, I spoke of non-utilized talent. Transportation and motion, where these are similar. So motion is your person having to reach for things or walk around to get things. Transportation is going to be movement of parts. So fork truck traffic, if you ever go into a facility and there's fork trucks everywhere, there's an opportunity for improvement there for sure.
Do you see waste as a cause or an effect? Well,
Ooh, that's a good question.
I personally believe that you do not reduce waste.
And
Wastes
that's,
are a result of doing something that reduces the waste. So
yeah, the waste,
you just can't go and reduce the waste.
Right.
You have to do something. So waste is a result
of, yeah, something
of
else
something.
that's wrong.
It's an outcome.
Yeah, it's an indicator that you have a problem. And so that's why we want to go out and measure it, because that's going to be an indicator of where we need to focus
The worst
efforts.
thing you can do then is try to eliminate that waste, because, and then what most people do is go eliminate their inventory, and the problem that caused that inventory or that overproduction is still there.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're shut down, right?
So you gotta solve the problem, and then the waste is a result
Exactly.
of that.
Exactly. So root cause.
And I think that's what gets lost in not seminars, but in seminars.
Yeah.
And it gets lost in education also. And I try to explain to the students, do not go and reduce waste.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't, because you got to solve the problem that is.
Yeah, we're going to measure the waste.
Waste is an outcome.
Yep.
Measure.
Don't reduce the waste.
Right.
Measure the waste so that you know where your opportunities. That's a really good point. Yep. Yeah. Jeff.
That's one of those areas where Goldrat and this come together, and that the definition that we just talked about of productive, only working towards the goal, and if you're not working towards the goal, you're not being productive in any way, shape, or form, then you're contributing to the waste of the organization.
Right. And I think, you know, in his story, and it's been a few years, like I said, since I read that, you know, their indicator was to go out and see where the inventory was piling up. And that was an indicator as to where the problem was, and then they started digging further. So
that whole idea was they wasted hours and hours and hours trying to go through figuring out where their constraint was.
Right.
And somebody said, well,
duh.
piles of inventory.
Yeah, it's where all the inventory is piling up. Yep. So yes, these are things that we want to measure, but we're not necessarily going to fix these directly. They're an indication of another problem. And we'll get into, when we get into the analyze, we'll talk about that. So we've got the inventory, or the transportation and motion inventory, and that's so important. So many management teams just want to come in and say, reduce inventory. And you say, all right, we'll just quit buying stuff. That is so not the answer. Yeah, John says, no, you're going to shut us down. It's
Your previous employer. And
yeah.
and that did shut them down?
Yeah. I mean, you just can't just take the inventory out. You'll hit the rocks, right? And then extra processing, so things that we do that the customer is not willing to pay for, but we have to do them because of the way something is set up in our process. And so we want to look at opportunities to change those potentially as well. But So to Zach's point, very important. At this point, we are just measuring so that we can make a good decision as to where we're going to deploy our money and our time and our resources to fix the biggest problem. So like in theory of constraints, they go look for the inventory. That's the indicator that that's the biggest problem they need to fix. They're not fixing the inventory, they're fixing the bottleneck and what's causing the bottleneck, and then the inventory should flow out automatically. It fixes itself. So here's another measure, OEE, and so this is something that maintenance folks will look at. So our overall equipment effectiveness, and this is another thing that you would want to plug into a bottleneck type situation. You don't want to plug it in everywhere, too much data overload. So you want to look at your availability, the performance of the machine, whether you're having to run it slow or shut it off continuously to rake out chips or something like that, and then your quality fallout. So if every fifth part is scrap or I'm having to rework, I'm having to go into the capacity of the machine to be able to do that. So another measure. Here's another measure. So a lot of plants do statistical process control, and we're now looking at using this kind of methodology for demand-driven MRP. So we want to control our inventory levels by specifying upper and lower control limits on our inventory and seeing what the normal variation of processes are. And when we get outside of the normal bounds of the process, that's an indicator. Again, we're just measuring an indicator that we have a problem. It doesn't tell us what the problem is, just tells us we have a problem. And so it gives us an opportunity to dig in. No, please do, please do.
But you said specify the control limits. Do you guys do that? Because you shouldn't specify the control limits. They should be calculated.
Yeah, they're calculated, but only after, you can only calculate the control limits after you get the process in control.
Right.
Actually, what this is showing is the spec limits.
Right. Well, when
So you got individuals.
Control limits are within inside the specification limits, it can go out of control, but
And
not-
still be in spec. And that's where you want to
the goal
be.
is to
Yeah.
reduce the variability.
That's where you want to be.
That's what Six Sigma is all about.
Right.
Is reducing the variability, so your control limits, but you don't specify control limits, you calculate them.
Yeah, calculated at a specified time.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I didn't know if that's what
Yep.
they're doing in
Yeah.
the industry. Are they actually setting those control?
Yeah, so you'll specify a time when you're going to take those calculations, when you determine that the process is in control, and I can set those. And so thank you for that clarification, because I don't want to mislead folks.
Hey, Don, I may be getting ahead of your presentation.
Yeah, that's fine.
You have a Pareto principle, so you want to find
Yep.
out where I don't know if this is a measurement or analyzed, but you want to find out what the problems are causing the most.
Yep, and it's not the next slide, but it might be the next one after that.
Yeah, you can see the slides here.
The next one is kind of what Zach was talking about, where now we're getting into the analyze. So now we're going to go back and look at all those wastes and OEE things so all those measurements that we took and say, okay, we've identified that we have a problem here. But now we've got to start peeling away the layers of the onion and figure out what the actual problem is. And this may be where you want to bring a team together and start pulling that apart. So here's the data, here's the evidence, and what can we take away from that? And so this is one of the original tools. This is a Taiichi Ohno tool, and we call it 5 whys. Sometimes you get to the root cause in 3 whys, and sometimes it takes you 7 whys, but somewhere on an average, it's 5 according to Toyota. So this is an example of if you don't do your analysis properly, you will solve the wrong problem. So this one says the wrong inventory, the wrong item was pulled from inventory. And if that's as far as we go, what do we typically fix? So I don't know if you can read that from back there. That's kind of small. It's, we're going to retrain our sock pickers. Problem solved, right? Maybe, maybe not. So if we start asking why, well, why was the wrong item picked from inventory? And it turns out we pulled it from inventory that was mislabeled. So you could retrain your stock pickers all day long, but if the inventory is mislabeled, they're just going to keep doing the same thing. You haven't solved the problem. So, okay, so now we've gotten this far. Oh, well, we're going to do an inspection. We'll inspect all the inventory, make sure everything is labeled correctly. Done, problem solved. Unless the reason it was mislabeled was a supplier issue and it happened prior to shipping to your warehouse. So you might have fixed your warehouse, but the next shipment that comes in is going to mess you up again. So you haven't fixed the problem. All right, so we call the supplier, they got to sort their inventory. And then you find out from the supplier, hey, that guy that's putting the labels on put the wrong label on the product, and so we're going to train him. That's how the supplier got messed up. All right, so now we've done retraining and inspecting and all of this, and then somebody says, well, how in the world did we get the wrong label on the stuff? Was it really that the guy was just, he wasn't trained? Or you come to find out that the labels for different orders are pre-printed and it's easy to apply the wrong label. So you've got your process set up for pre-printing and you print out this big stack of labels and they're all mixed up on a table and this poor guy is trying to figure out which one goes with which. And it's not so much that he's not trained, it's that your process isn't one piece flow, right? So you're not giving him one set of labels at a time as the parts come through to be labeled. And so you've introduced the opportunity for an error into your process. And no matter how much training you do, he's still going to get confused. And so this would be, now that we've asked all the whys, why does this happen? And you may have to do these kinds of things, but that's not going to solve your root problem. You're not going to make the problem go away until you get to the root. And it typically takes going out, go see, ask why, respectfully, right? And talk to those people in the process until you get out to this guy at your supplier who's sitting at the table going, look, how would you know which label to put on which parts? Oh, I see the issue now. Yeah. So got to get out of the training room, out of the conference room with your team and talk to folks. So another analyze tool. So all kinds of tools that we can use, and this is why it's kind of important to have somebody who is like your plumber, right? He knows how to use the tools and he can get the job done and get it done correctly and everybody's smiling and you might pay him a little bit, but it's better than me coming in there and trying to figure out, putting the channel locks on the joint instead of using a pipe wrench, and then I mess up the joint with my channel locks and and nobody has a good experience and I don't ever want to do it again. So tons of different tools, and plugged in the right way and in the right place and in the right time in the DMAIC process are very effective. So this is an is not, and this is a fun one to go through. So the problem is this and it's not this. And so you're separating the hay from the haystack a piece at a time to try and get down to the needle. So again, it's root cause analysis where you're taking your data. And so for this one, it's saying it's happening in this location and not that location. It's happening, so they've got pip fragments in their canned peaches, it looks like. So they're small fragments. It is less than 16th of an inch fragments, but they're not bigger fragments. So that kind of narrows you down. Well, if it was the big fragments, it can't be that if it's just small ones. And it's the production before July the 30th, or after July the 30th, but not before. So what happened on July the 30th? Narrow it down a little bit more. And it's the peaches that are coming from this farm and not the other ones. And so it's the narrowing down and narrowing down. So the same way the 5 whys works, this will too. There's the Pareto. It's a Pareto analysis. Great way, especially in these days of big data. It's very difficult to get your arms around data anymore. We wind up with tons of data. It's very hard to organize it into a picture that's worth something to us. So this is a really useful tool. Mr. Pareto, and this is more, again, of a Six Sigma tool. Mr. Pareto was a statistician, an egotistical one, put his name, you know, that's one thing I've noticed about statisticians. They all have to have their name on things, right? But he came up with this very simple way of organizing your data into the 80-20. And so he figured out, what was he, pea pods? Are you familiar with this story, Peter, about the, he was looking at pea pods, I think, in Italy or something, and found out that 80% of his peas were coming out of 20% of his pods.
He was an economist.
Oh, yeah, he was a tax collector. Yeah, tax collector. Yeah. Yep. So, you know, started looking at this concept and applying it to all kinds of different things, including the pea pods at some point. And I said, you know, and it's scary how often this works, that 80% of your problems come from 20% of whatever's going on in your process. Yeah, people or machines or suppliers or whatever, right? So another way to look at our data. Fishbone diagram, yeah, Ishikawa, fishbone diagram, cause and effect diagram. We have all kinds of, this is great for brainstorming activity. Don't ever sit down at your desk and try to do this by yourself. It's absolutely no fun and really worthless. And I like when we draw the fish. There are some categories that are pretty standard, the man method, Mother Nature. You can put any categories. You know, the IT folks I worked with one time, you know, they had the user interface and the database structure and the server, you know, so they broke it out into different kind of categories. It's whatever categories you want to use that work for you. But again, this is kind of the beginnings of a 5 analysis. Sometimes this will lead into, you know, so we've identified that we have these issues and now what's causing the issues. So like a step one of the analysis. FMEA, familiar with that one. I know this is an eye chart and I'm not even going to try and read it, but again, a really good brainstorming tool, and this can be done over a long period of time because there are things here. This is all your risk analysis. So what's the likelihood that this is going to go wrong or that's going to go wrong or something else is going to go wrong in my process, and we break it down by can we detect the problem, and how often does it occur, and then is there any way to keep it from happening, and how severe is it when it happens, and we rate those and come up with a risk priority number that kind of points us to where our biggest problems are. So again, a really good brainstorming tool. I love to bring the maintenance folks in on these kinds of things. Those guys know a ton of stuff. And really can help fill in some of the holes for what the engineers don't know, what the ops folks don't know. So we want to, this is a very, these can be pages and pages and pages. So another good thing for a Kaizen event. And our capability analysis, so it's kind of the SPC turns sideways. So we do SPC first, and we stabilize the process, and then we can kind of see what our capability analysis is. See what that looks like compared to our spec limits. This is a bad one. We've got obvious defects, and so we would want to dig into the data and see what was going on there. Affinity diagrams, these are real easy. These work well when you have a group of folks that you're pulling together for a first-time team. Nobody wants to be the first one to say anything. You're afraid that the brute guy who already thinks he knows the answer is just going to shoot everybody's ideas down, and so everybody is just kind of internal, pulled in. So you hand everybody a stack of sticky notes and say, you know, write down all your ideas about this, what you think the problem is, what you think the solutions are. And have fun and fill out the sticky notes. And then you just collect all those sticky notes and you start putting them in categories. And so we may have, you know, I think the problem is the machine, and I think the problem is the coolant, and I think the problem is the operator, the tooling, the whatever, and pull all those categories together. And then see where the affinity is. So see where the big gathering of sticky notes is. So the majority of people feel like it's the machine. The machine's old, the machine needs, it needs to be overhauled. Everybody seems to agree on that. And I've got this one loud guy way out here saying, it's the operator. I know it's the operator, and I know the answer is just fire the operator. But he's going to be kind of out there alone, and he may want to stand up and say something at that point. But it's a good way to kind of develop your team. You have the team forming, storming, norming, performing. So you're in that forming. This may start some storming. You got the one guy that disagrees, then you're going to start the arguments, and that can be healthy, in this kind of scenario. So this is a good way to start that. And then they start having some consensus and really working together. But that's a good way to break everybody out of their shell. Fast analysis. So this is setup reduction. Shigeo Shingo, he wrote the book on setup reduction. And so he has an analysis tool where we go in, we look at a setup. So if we've decided this is a bottleneck, the setups are 3 hours long, we need to fix that. We've looked at our theory of constraints, and we're going to put all our focus on that and figure out what do we want to do, where's our opportunities. So we move things. If I could be going and getting my paperwork ahead of time and my tooling set up, why do I wait until the machine's shut down to go start doing that? Quick change attachments, trying to eliminate settings with hard stops and those kind of things. And then we want to eliminate trials and adjustments. We shoot for first piece good, and how come we can't get the first piece good? Why do we have to do all these adjustments and adjustments and adjustments? So those make for really great Kaizen events. Those are fun. Once we figure all this out and do the measure and analyze with this tool, then it's dig in and see what we can come up with, try some stuff. Then you get into plan, do, check, act. We talked a little bit earlier about ABC analysis. You've got ABC XYZ now, where we look at the ABC, the importance, high, low, and then we also look at the forecastability. So is it something that is not a lot of variability in the usage, or is it usage all over the place? And so that can help us if we're looking at potential inventory reduction, like in finished goods. So it's not really a process issue, but a forecasting issue. So another analyze tool. This one is just a smattering of stuff. So 6S tools and Visual Factory. Some of these are the very first Kaizen events that folks do. We need to organize the process so that we can figure out what it looks like, right? And when there's a problem. All kinds of improve tools. I am so out of time. Kanban and Pokeyoke and total productive maintenance, we talked about that. Just improving the flow and setup reduction. This is where we just try all the things. The fun part, right? So we don't have trouble getting anybody to jump on board with these kind of things, but we want it to be organized. We want to plug in some of the more useful tools. And here it is. So here's the control. We made it. So this is so key. You want to standardize whatever it is that you discovered works. And so we do that with the standard work. We put a chalk under what's trying to roll back down the hill, right? If we don't standardize, and Taiichi Ohno will tell you, without standards, there can be no improvement. You've got to have a calm sea to be able to see where the next opportunity is. So you put whatever your change was in place, and you train everybody. You take these opportunities to coach people to start changing that culture. Be sure to include everybody. So operators, supervisors, maintenance folks, everybody needs to understand how the process works. If it's in the front office, all those people you had in the swim lanes have to understand how the new process works. And if folks immediately see another opportunity to improve, okay, well, let's set this standard first and then we'll try the next thing. So training and coaching, these are the droids you're looking for. And we want to communicate. Very, very important. When you have a team that is pulled together and put a lot of effort into making an improvement, we want to publicize that win. Either an A3, a metrics board, very important, shows the targets and how we're climbing towards those targets, or we've gone beyond the targets, changing the culture. This is how you do it. You can't just go in and tell people, we're going to change you. It has to be a gradual process. You have to start getting that buy-in, and you get that buy-in with communication and publicizing the wins. So did you want to put something in here? So you had some questions.
Some research, and I'm going to use the word causation, but I can't use, but it's only for illustration purposes, because you can't say causation with statistical analysis. But anyway, does stability cause standardization, or does standardization cause stability? Or what?
No, I would say that standardization causes stability.
Okay, so you need to standardize, then stabilize.
Yeah, I would say until you set the standard, write it down and set it in stone, nail it to the floor.
So stability, I define it would be the lack of variation.
Or minimizing that variation, yeah.
Or not, never, you're always going to have variation.
Yeah, especially if you're dealing with people, right?
But interesting, when I did my analysis, does stability cause standardization, or does standardization cause stability? And I did the analysis both ways, and they don't have an effect on each other.
Oh, that's bad.
It's mediated by improvement practices.
Ah.
So, and improvement mediates both relationships. So when you have stability and you have improvement, then that causes standardization.
Yep.
Or when you have standardization, improvement, it causes
So let me go back to this one. So stabilize, and then roll your rock up the hill, and then stabilize.
And then standard, yeah. But both worked. But both of my statistical models worked. But it's mediated by the improvement.
Yeah, you've got to have a very disciplined improvement process. Yeah.
So really what I'm getting at long term is, what is the sequence of implementation? You know, what should you do? Because you got a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
A new company. You're not going to do this all at one time.
Oh, no. Nope. It is a small piece at a time.
People go, we're going to do
They're going to do it all. Yeah.
So there's got to be, nobody has came out with, we'll do this first, do this, as a map to put lean into place associated with that. Because people will come to these seminars or read books and they go, we're going to do this
we just throw all the tools at it.
There should be a sequence of implementation
right.
that facilitates this. This is just one part of that. So should you have stability or should you have standardization? And right now it says is that right now it doesn't matter as long as you have improvement practices. And so if you have improvement, stability will cause standardization. If you have improvement, standardization will cause stability, and maybe it creates just maybe a plan, do, check, fix cycle. Yeah, I mean, typically to me, any situation that I'm walking into that I've been asked to help with is usually chaotic. You know, everybody's just trying to do something to help. The process is broken, and there's no standardization. So to me, you know, I'm an engineer, I know this. Entropy, yeah. So things go to their state of chaos. Typically things are not going to come together and organize themselves. They have to be forced to organize themselves. And so that continuous improvement process is going to start taking that chaos. We need to map out what's going on and then start standardizing, putting those pieces in place and nailing them down, and then do the next piece of improvement and nail it down. You never get rid of all of the variation. You never get rid of all the chaos. I mean, that's why it's continuous improvement. We all have jobs.
One of the things APICS-DAWN did when it was put in the total production system was it insisted that standard operating procedures had to be set. And it didn't matter if it was writing a purchase order, if it was writing process had to be standardized first before we could do anything else. So everybody's doing it the same way. Then you could look at what you had to do for improvement. And then when you mentioned something about nobody's really taken it to the point of how do you define what to work on next, that's semi-untrue in that goal rat constraint.
Yeah.
The only one and only constraint, if you work on that, you're going to take your steps to improve, because every time you complete a constraint, you're going to create a new constraint that's going to take you upwards and upwards and upwards. So it kind of gives you a map as to where to go, what to do, how to go about working a continuous improvement project. So you can, and then you can take it even further than that, really. Because once you get to the improvement projects and stuff, where do you go next?
Yeah. And so our topic was just the first Kaizen event. You know, where do you start? So, you know, for those of us who sat in on the pre-PDM, that was a great lead-in to this topic. It was totally not planned. It was just karma. But very true. And then, so once you identify that, then where do we go? What do we do? And so, you know, some more oh no isms. So make your workplace into a show place that can be understood by everyone at a glance. In terms of quality, it means to make the defects immediately apparent. In terms of quantity, it means that progress or delay measured against the plan is made immediately apparent. And when this is done, problems can be discovered immediately. So that's the standardization. We standardize everything so that we know when something's out of order, we see it very quickly. And everyone can initiate the improvement plans. So when we've brought the culture along, everybody's invited to recognize those problems, stop and fix. And then if you're going to do Kaizen continuously, you've got to assume that things are a mess. You know, the biggest problem is to think you have no problems, right? Too many people just assume that things are all right the way they are. Aren't you guys convinced that the way you're doing things is the right way? And this, you know, this was how he would approach his folks. So that's no way to get anything done. Kaizen is about changing the way things are. If you assume that things are all right the way they are, you can't do Kaizen, so change something.
Dawn mentioned the fact that these are mini things. You don't want a big, it's like how do you eat the elephant?
Yep. Small bites at a time. Pick a good win.
The keys to Toyota was that in Toyota production system, they were doing averaging somewhere in the vicinity of 2,000 Kaizen events a year.
Yeah. So, you know, we think of a Kaizen event, oh, it's got to be 3 to 5 days. Nope, it's just, it's a little burst of work and change and improvement, experimenting, trying things, but trying to do that intelligently and in an organized fashion, disciplined, where you know what the standard is and we're going to try something a little different. We're going to plan to experiment, we're going to do the experiment, we're going to check on the results of the experiment, and then we're going to take action. Either we're going to change the standard or we're going to go back to the standard and try something else, right? All right, well, we are beyond time, but back at the very beginning was my contact information. I will scoot back to that. So if you've got questions, something comes up, and you're a bit, there I am.
There it is. There's a CLS SMBV.
No, ignore that part. It's just this part. Dawn.hill@us.abb.com.
Dawn, thanks very much for presenting. This has been a very good insight and overview. I wanted to get your thoughts on some techniques to make it fun. What have you discovered that really works?
I think just the idea of allowing people to experiment with their process, giving folks who have been stuck in a frustrating process, sometimes for a long time, permission to experiment. Try something, try this, try that. To me, that's what makes it fun. You know, gathering these brainstorming exercises, gathering the ideas, you know, throwing in all the wild and crazy ideas and allowing that, you know, that yes, Kaizen is about discipline and standardization and all of that stuff, and it just sounds very structured. But that doesn't mean that we can't have fun, that we can't you know, throw ideas out there that are crazy and laugh and enjoy each other's company, tell stories about things that have happened in the past. You know, oh, we've tried that before. Really? What happened? Why didn't we do it? And so you get into some of the crazier stories. I always try to keep it fun, and you know, while you're trying to hit time, which obviously I'm very bad at, you know, allowing the interchange and the development of the team. I think that's the best part, is building the relationships between the team members, building that trust and camaraderie, so that you do change that culture. People aren't going to change unless they see what's in it for them, right? So it's got to be fun. It's got to be something that's interesting, and it's got to solve a problem that's frustrating to them. So, you know, when people are quiet, I'll always say, you know, what makes you not want to get up in the morning and go to work? What is that thing that comes along, you know, once a week or once a month that you go, oh gosh, I got to do that today. Let's fix that, and you'll get engagement.
That's good. Well, thank you.
With regard to Kaizen events, and you know your baseline, you know where you are. With regard to Kaizen events, is it easily reversible, or as far as the just go do it type of projects? Is Kaizen one of those that is easily reversible if it doesn't
Yeah,
work?
so if...
Because you're talking about experiments.
Right, and so that's the importance of having that standard. So you've got a standard way that you know works, and then we're going to experiment. And sometimes, especially if we're really going for a stretch goal, we try something just crazy, and it works terribly, and I have done that. You know, and people are really like, Dawn, you know that's not going to work. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to see what happens. Why doesn't it work? Okay. You know, but I've got that safety net. I've got the standard behind me. And so we did some things. We were building large generators up in Wisconsin. And I wanted to know, you know, what if we built the control cabinet while it was on the ground before we lifted it on top of the gas tank? It was big things because they were having to get up on ladders and do crazy things in the control cabinet. And they're like, you know, that's not going to work because then we got to lift it up and you got wires and stuff hanging all over the place, and then you got to get it on the, I'm like, yeah, but just play with me. Can we see what happens? Okay. And we had a great laugh. I mean, we had tangles of wires all over the place, and it was horrible. And they were like, you see, it didn't work. I'm like, yeah, but now we know why it doesn't work. So can we fix that problem? And, you know, so instead of going completely backwards, which we'll have to do to get through the rest of the day, you know, let's see if we can't figure out how to fix the tangly wire problem so we don't have wires in the gas tank. You know, how do we fix that? Oh, you know, and then you get people's wheels spinning, and that's a lot of fun to me, is, you know, well, we could try this, or we could try that, or here's this roll of tape. You know, let's try, duct tape fixes everything. And so you give people the permission to just try some stuff. Take the time, you know, and when you start eliminating those constraints and you free up time, if your marketing and sales department aren't able to fill up that time with things to make to run through the process, take time to play, you know, try some things. You just might stumble, you know, the blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Super question.
Dawn, thank you.